In the shadow of Europe's fading aristocracy, in the moral ashes of 2 world wars, a new kind of dream was taking form. One not bound by ethics or conscience, but by bloodlines, power, and the allure of evolution itself. At the center of this quiet storm were 3 men. Oswald E. Spencer, the reclusive earl of a dying house. Dr. Edward Ashford, a nobleman, scientist obsessed with legacy. And Dr. James Marcus, a virologist prodigy, with no interest in politics, only control. They met as classmates, young men full of theory and arrogance, drawn together by a mutual fascination with the possibility of genetic manipulation, and the long-abandoned ideologies of eugenics. What if human beings could be perfected? What if evolution could be accelerated, directed? In 1966, the first real spark ignited. Marcus had uncovered an obscure legend from West Africa, a flower revered by the Nandapaya tribe, said to grant divine strength to those who consumed it. This stairway of the sun was not mere folklore. When the trio sponsored an expedition deep into the Nandapaya lands, they found it, nestled in an underground garden, ancient and untouched. Inside its DNA was a mutagenic virus, unlike anything known to modern science. They called it progenitor, but the virus refused to yield. In American soil, the flower withered, the virus died. It was clear progenitor could not be replicated. It had to be harvested, and harvesting it would require more than noble titles and closed-door funding. It required infrastructure, resources, a front. And so, Umbrella Pharmaceuticals was born. Founded under the guise of legitimate medical research, Umbrella masked its true purpose: to exploit the progenitor virus and carry out the dream their forefathers had dared whisper. Spencer led the charge, with Ashford financing the operation and Marcus begrudgingly contributing his genius. They built a research base on the edge of the Nandapaya garden, smuggling samples back to the west. Spencer, ever the visionary, saw a greater opportunity. If progenitor could be weaponized, they could sell it, not to the governments, but to anyone with the right amount of money and ambition. This plan will be later known as the T-Virus Project, a covert program where each of the founders would secretly develop strains of progenitor racing towards the ultimate biological weapon, one that could change war, power, and humanity itself. What began as a scientific hypothesis had now evolved into something darker, and the world had no idea. In the heart of the jungle, in the name of progress, a new plague was being born. Umbrella Pharmaceuticals had grown to a global power, its hands in medicine, politics, and military research. When inside its ivory towers and hidden labs, the founding circle had begun to fracture. Ideology gave way to paranoia. Loyalty was a weakness, and the dream of a new world was being smothered by the ambition to rule it alone. The first to fall was Dr. Edward Ashford. In 1968, the public was told he died in a lab accident, exposed to an early strain of the T-virus he helped design. But behind closed doors, whispers traced the tragedy back to Spencer himself. Death was too convenient, too clean. Ashford had grown cautious, perhaps too cautious. And Spencer, driven by his vision of a godless evolution, needed no doubters. The virus that had killed Edward was his own legacy, turned against him. His son, Alexander Ashford, was a disappointment to the Umbrella's inner circle, lacking his father's genius and dismissed by Spencer as irrelevant. Alexander tried to restore the family's honor in secret. His answer was not a breakthrough, but a resurrection. He used cloning and gene manipulation to create Alexia, a daughter engineered from a genetic memory of the family matriarch, Veronica. They were surpassed in all in intellect, beauty, and ruthlessness. But Alexia's brilliance came at a price. In the pursuit of perfection, she infected herself with a new strain, the T. Veronica strain, and entered a deep, cryogenic sleep to allow her body time to adapt. Her twin, Alfred, was left behind, a pale shadow of her legacy. Alfred inherited only titles and minor administrative duties. He would rule in name only, clinging to the illusion of power as Ashford line would quietly crumble. James Marcus, meanwhile, had main enemies of a different sort. His methods had grown grotesque. In his private facility, he experimented on executive trainees, infecting them with the T-virus to study mutation rates. The board saw him not as a genius, but a liability. Deep beneath the layers of security and pretenses, research on the progenitor virus had reached a dangerous turning point. At the heart of this transformation was a young virologist with a mind as brilliant as it was cold, Dr. William Birkin. Recruited by Spencer at a young age and mentored by the elusive Dr. Marcus, Birkin took inspiration from his former teacher's radical experiments, twisted them even further. Where Marcus had seen the T-virus as a tool for superiority, creating new life forms capable of surpassing humanity, Birkin saw something more horrific. He proposed a terrifying refinement, not to kill, but to reanimate, to preserve a body in gross-tech state of undeath. Cellular activity could continue long after the heart had been stopped. By 1978, the vision for the T-virus had mutated as much as the virus itself. No longer a simple bioweapon to cause mass death, the virus was repurposed to keep the infected alive. Victims would become slaves to their own broken biology, rapid, mindless, cannibalistic husks with an unyielding drive to kill. To the world above, Umbrella still wore a white coat, but below, in the guts of its hidden laboratories, it had become something else entirely. A godless forge where humanity was dissected, altered, and discarded in the name of progress. And yet, there was something older, something deeper in the design of all of it. The name, the symbol. A red and white umbrella insignia wasn't just a corporate logo. It was a resurrection, a relic borrowed from a forgotten past. Spencer, long before Umbrella's rise, had studied briefly under a woman known only in whispers as Mother Miranda, a reclusive biologist hidden in the shadows of a crumbling village deep in Eastern Europe. There, under her tutelage, he had encountered a symbol, a crest of protection and control used by an ancient four horsemen. It was called the Umbrella. To Spencer, it wasn't just a name, it was a prophecy, it was destiny. Fitting crown for a company that would come to rule not through politics or the economy, but through biology. The progenitor now refined into the T-virus, and Birkin's twisted genius reshaping its purpose. Umbrella entered a new phase, one that would redefine the boundaries of life and death, one that would fracture Marcus's legacy, elevate Birkin's, and set in motion a series of horrors the world was not prepared to face. By the early 1980s, a discovery reignited Umbrella's ambitions. Some were buried in the mountains of failed experiments decomposing flesh. A single anomaly stood out, a subject who demonstrated immunity to the T-virus, not resistance, immunity. It was a revelation that turned the project on its head. Till then, the virus had been used to destroy, to reanimate, to create chaos. But now it could be used to mold. The right host, the virus didn't just kill or mutate, it evolved. And that changed everything. What followed was a renaissance of horror cloaked in scientific advancement. Across continents, Umbrella's laboratories began engineering bioorganic weapons, or BOWs. Chimeric abominations spliced from human and animal DNA, bred for war. These weren't just weapons, they were hunters. Sentient predators with claws, fangs, and just enough intelligence to track survivors. Built not just to kill, but to erase. With its research sprawling across nations, Umbrella had grown into a labyrinth of secrets. To manage the scale, the company fractured itself into regional power blocks. By the late 1980s, its empire expanded beyond continents, beyond nations, and nestled quietly in the east. The third pillar of its global monolith emerged. Umbrella Japan. Formed in 1987, the Japanese branch focused not on viruses, but on the machines needed to control them. Robotics, neural interfaces, containment technologies. Umbrella Japan was the cold steel to US and Europe's viral chaos. In sterile laboratories and high-security tech hubs, engineers crafted the hardware for a future where bioweapons and machines could operate as one. In this fusion of flesh and circuitry, the future warfare was being designed piece by piece. To expand its reach even further, the company acquired a fleet of luxurious cruise liners under the Pargis line. Among them were the Queen Zenobia, Queen Dido, in the Queen Cimmeriah myths, building castles that masked a far darker purpose. These ships would no longer carry passengers but cargo, viral samples, mutated prototypes, and classified bioweapons. They moved quietly across the oceans under the veil being civilian logistics ships. Spencer Rain, a separate acquisition, was outfitted with additional containment systems, capable of housing everything from infected tissue samples to fully grown BOWs. These ships weren't just transport. They were mobile laboratories, built to isolate outbreaks should the worst occur, or to quarantine an entire crew if necessary. Not even the skies were safe. Air transport facilities, once serving research expeditions, were retooled for Umbrella's growing logistical web. Chief among them was the Arctic Transport Terminal, a relic from the 1960s. Originally built to support the Ashford family's experience beneath the polar ice. After Alexia Ashford's disappearance in 1983, the terminal lost its scientific purpose. But it found a new one, as a central node in Umbrella's international shipping network. Cold, isolated, and forgotten by most, it became the perfect launch point for airlifting viral material across the globe without interference. Despite its secret fleets and shadowed skies, Umbrella USA remained the heart of the machine, and its crown jewel was Raccoon City. By the dawn of the 1990s, a third of the city's population, over 30,000 people, were on Umbrella's payroll, working in labs, subsidiaries, and front companies. Pharmacies, hospitals, factories, office buildings, they were all part of the web. To most, Umbrella was a generous employer, a titan that fueled the local economy. But beneath the city, in the forests and mountains, lay its true identity. The Arkley Laboratory, hidden within the mountain range. The nest, buried beneath the city streets. Secret elevators in public buildings. Laboratories behind locked doors and disguised as utility corridors. Raccoon City wasn't just a town, it was a ticking time bomb. And for Spencer, he was watching. From a secluded estate, now more fortress than mansion, the last founder left alive watched the world edge closer to collapse. His dream of a perfected human race was nearly ready. The pieces were in place. Viruses, parasites, machines, vessels, cities. All he needed was a single spark, one mistake, one leak, and he would get it sooner than he thought. In 1988, Umbrella Security Service operatives were dispatched. Marcus was executed and his body dumped in the dark, cold waters beneath his lab. But death was not the end. Deep within his decaying corpse, remnants of the progenitor virus clung to life and waited. Brandon Bailey, once Marcus's protege, co-discoverer of the progenitor, fared no better. While he wasn't betrayed in the boardroom, he was imprisoned in practice. Umbrella forced him to remain in Africa, overseeing virus production in the Napaya region, isolated, watched, used, and finally eliminated in 1998. When Spencer feared his knowledge had become a risk too great to ignore. Across the Atlantic, the last remnants of the four houses held on by bloodline and legacy. Dr. Henry and the 16th Earl Beardsley, once proud contributors to Umbrella's early rise, had both died by the early 1990s, their deaths lost in corporate charm. Their daughters, Christine Henry and Emmeline Beardsley, inherited their father's estates and laboratories in Europe. Christine proves loyal, managing European operations in silence. Emmeline, however, had ambitions. She whispered of reforms, taking the company in a new direction. But she lacked support. Spencer had long since purged the board of true threats, and Emmeline's aspirations were buried underneath red tape and quiet intimidation. He would remain a figurehead, watched but tolerated. By the dawn of the 1990s, Umbrella stood taller than ever. Its global reach extended into pharmaceuticals, defense, politics, and clandestine research. Yet, it was rotting from within. A founding generation that had been reduced to ghosts, martyrs, and monsters. Only Spencer remained, untouched, ever watching. The architect of the world slowly descending into bio-organic chaos. He sacrificed everything, friends, allies, even humanity itself, not to save the world, but to reshape it. The final phase of his vision has yet to begin. By the 1990s, the divisions between the Umbrella factions grew deeper. Each region hoarded secrets. Each project operated in shadows. And while Spencer remained the godfather of the entire empire, even he could no longer control the spiral of madness he had unleashed. Because beneath it all, the viruses were changing, evolving, and one day, they would escape their cages. When the Soviet Union collapsed in the 1990s, Umbrella didn't waste a moment. Chaos had opened its doors. Entire nations were unraveling. Regimes were falling, and within the ruins of the communist militia, intelligence agencies, and forgotten war zones, Umbrella saw an opportunity to militarize its empire. It began with mercenaries, former guerrilla fighters, ex-special forces operatives, nationalist extremists, and war-hardened soldiers from the crumbling Warsaw Pact. Men who had spent their lives fighting shadows now paid to serve them. These recruits became the foundation of the Umbrella Biohazard Countermeasure Service, the UBCS, a paramilitary unit created under the guise of containing bioweapon incidents. In truth, they were cleaners, employed to erase Umbrella's mistakes before the world could see them. Simultaneously, the company expanded its Black Ops wing, the Umbrella Security Service. Elite operatives trained to protect Umbrella's research, eliminate witnesses, and kill traitors. Unlike the UBCS, they weren't soldiers, they were executioners, built for precision and silence. Supporting them was an even more insidious network, the Umbrella Intelligence Division and its operatives, known only as monitors. Their job? Infiltrate, observe, and report. Even their own colleagues weren't safe. Scientists were shadowed, executives were tracked, researchers lived and died under a microscope of paranoia. To sharpen its growing army, Umbrella established a boot camp in 1994 on Rockford Island, an isolated facility in the southern hemisphere surrounded by ocean and silence. It was placed under the command of Alfred Ashford, grandson of the late Edward. Though little more than a figurehead, Alfred upheld the Ashford legacy with cruelty and pomp, enforcing discipline with fear and a brittle vanity that concealed how far the once proud family had fallen. But Umbrella's greatest military asset came not from training, but from genetics. Colonel Sergei Vladimir, a towering war veteran from Russia, joined Umbrella's ranks after the Soviet collapse. His service record was impeccable, his loyalty unquestioned. But what made him valuable was his DNA. Sergei possessed a rare genotype, a match made in the twisted halls of virology. Umbrella saw him not just as a commander, but a template. Using his genetic material, the company was finally able to mass-produce tyrants, turning him into both architect and ancestor of the most terrifying BOW line. In the United States, Umbrella USA took control, its heart in Chicago, and its soul buried deep beneath the Arclay Mountains. With the Arclay Laboratory served as a cradle of bioweapons development, here researchers refined the T-virus, conducted live tests, and laid the groundwork for something even more dangerous, the G-virus. The G-virus, unlike its predecessor, can repair dead tissue, not just reanimate it. In theory, it was a realization of Spencer's ultimate dream, a virus that didn't kill, but transcended morality, elevating those strong enough into something godlike. Research intensified, culminating in the construction of a nest, a high-security subterranean facility beneath Raccoon City in 1991, specifically to develop and contain the G-Virus project under the watchful eyes of Dr. Birkin. But across the ocean, not everyone was content to follow Umbrella USA's lead. In Western Europe, national branches began to push back. Resentment brewed over the American faction's failures, their inability to create intelligent BOWs, their reckless viral leaks, their obsession with brute force. From the resistance rose Umbrella Europe, a regional powerhouse formed by merging several of Umbrella's continental branches into one unified front. Europe's answer to the T-virus shortcomings was the Nemesis Project. The idea was simple and terrifying. If the T-virus destroyed higher brain functions, what if a parasite could replace them? What if intelligence could be restored or even improved by inserting an external control system directly into the host's nervous system? Thus, the NE-alpha parasite was born. Engineered to act as a second brain, it could take control of the T-virus host, regulate its aggression, and even issue commands. No longer would BOWs be mindless monsters, they could be sentient weapons. The Nemesis T-type, a fusion of parasite and tyrant, became the ultimate symbol of European supremacy. A a towering, relentless killing machine with a mind of its own. America scrambled to respond. Desperate not to be outdone, Umbrella USA initiated the Talos Project, a desperate attempt to compete by fusing artificial intelligence with viral weaponry. Rather than restore the mind biologically, Talos Project sought to pilot a tyrant remotely, using an organic neural interface linked to the onboard AI. It was an experiment in control, a way to remove the unpredictability the human element gave it. 2 philosophies, 2 weapons. 2 empires inside one company. In 1993, a hospital in the Arklay Mountains became a testing ground for human experimentation. Something went wrong. Victims died in agony, but there was no police inquiry. No arrests, no headlines. The hospital quietly shut down. Umbrella's name was never mentioned. And when in 1996 a local reporter dug too deep in the story, his body was found weeks later, bloated and floating down the Ames River. His death was labeled a drowning. There was no follow-up investigation. Umbrella had become untouchable, its crimes erased, enemies silenced, its secrets buried beneath a mountain of bodies and blank pages. But something was changing. In the labs beneath Raccoon City, Dr. William Birkin was hiding his research from his own company. In Europe, whispers of a dissent grew louder. In Spencer's private files, a new name began to appear: Project Ouroboros. By 1998, Umbrella had amassed a private military force that rivaled some nations. In the air, it deployed UH-60 Black Ops, Little Birds, Sea Stallions, Harrier jets, and Hercules water landing planes. On the ground, soldiers were equipped with M4A1 rifles, MP5 submachine guns, and the USS operatives donned British S-10 gas masks, designed for bioweapon containment and combat alike. But guns and choppers weren't just the tools. Real power was information. In 1998, the company's dominance in bioorganic weapons was no longer uncontested. Shadows of a global industry, a rival corporation had emerged. Just as ruthless, just as advanced, and eager to steal what Umbrella had created. It sent a ghost into Umbrella USA's ranks, the deep cover operative named Ada Wong, whose skills in infiltration and manipulation were as dangerous as any virus. Ada wormed her way into the heart of the Arklay laboratory by ensnaring its new chief researcher, Dr. John Clemens. In a carefully constructed romance, through him she acquired files on an active BOW project and a sliver of intelligence on a far more elusive target, Dr. William Birkin's T-Virus. Her employers wanted more than just the T-Virus scraps, they wanted the future of biowarfare. And G, with its ability to regenerate tissue and adapt its host as a superhuman entity, was the key. But Umbrella's death wouldn't come at the hands of espionage alone. It began in May 1998, not with the weapon, but with the mistake. Containment failure, officially, the cause was unknown. Privately, it was chaos. Deep within Arklay laboratory, forgotten nightmare had awoken. An experimental BOW, developed a decade prior by the long-dead Dr. James Marcus. The creature's name was Queen Leech. War for Marcus's viral research and his dying obsession with revenge. The Queen possessed intelligence, will, and a hatred that cannot be contained. It triggered a breakdown in the facility's systems, releasing dozens of bioweapons from the holding cells. Among them were the Cerberus units, canine BOWs designed for speed and brutality. They escaped into the Arklay Mountains, where they began attacking hikers and campers. Victims were found half-eaten, others missing entirely. Some survivors turned violent and then feral. Zombies. Created by the viral transmission through saliva and wounds, the infection has spread beyond the lab. The walls are no longer holding. Umbrella scrambled to contain the disaster. Armed squads were dispatched to clear out the Arklay region and reactivate the abandoned executive training school, hoping to regain control of the situation. The Queen Leech was still alive. Teens were slaughtered. Panic began to brew under the surface. Umbrella made a decision. It needed a cover story, a scapegoat. Enter Albert Wesker. Since 1996, Wesker had quietly transitioned from military intelligence to the command of STARS, a special operations team embedded in the Raccoon City Police Department. Funded and imparted by Umbrella itself, STARS had become a shield. Useful, respected, and expendable. Umbrella gave Wesker a mission: send his team into the Arklays under the pretense of investigating the recent murders. Let them encounter the BOWs. Let them die. Their deaths would be dismissed as a tragic loss. And in the meantime, Wesker was to use the chaos to recover sensitive data, destroy incriminating evidence, and detonate the lab, erasing Umbrella's fingerprints from the massacre. But Wesker had plans of his own. He had seen the writing on the wall. Umbrella was doomed. Hollowed out by infighting and hubris, the rival corporation had offered him a future. One where he could survive the coming collapse and continue his own ambitions for power. So Wesker betrayed Umbrella, not by refusing his mission, by twisting it. Followed the plan, deployed his team, faked his death, recorded the combat footage, and set the facility to self-destruct. Rather than return to the files to Umbrella USA, he vanished into the smoke. English's screeching echo lost in the explosion behind him, and the 4 surviving team members, Chris Redfield, Jill Valentine, Barry Burton, and Rebecca Chambers, reported him dead. Wesker was declared KIA. Umbrella had lost one of his most dangerous assets, and had no idea he was still alive. Meanwhile, the infected corpses in the Arclights continued to rise. Cerberus were no longer alone. Something was spreading, something airborne, bloodborne, unstoppable. And just beneath the surface of Raccoon City, the nest awaited. Birkin's G-Virus was ready, and so was his ego. The end had begun. Once utterly burned and the company scrambled to maintain its crumbling lives, Dr. William Birkin, once Umbrella's brightest mind, was making his own quiet exit. For years, Birkin had served as a crown jewel of Umbrella's USA research division. He was the architect of the G-Virus. A strain born not to reanimate the dead like the T-Virus, but to evolve the living into something beyond human. Regeneration, mutation, immortality. Spencer called it a step towards godhood, but even gods have their favorites. Birkin had expected a reward, an invitation into Spencer's inner circle, the final validation of his life's work. Instead, he was met with silence, passed over, ignored. To Birkin, it was a betrayal. All those years in Nest, all those sacrifices, and he was just another tool, disposable. So he made a decision. If Umbrella didn't want him, the US military would. In the weeks that followed, Birkin entered into the secret negotiations with government agents. In exchange for samples of both the T-Virus and G-Virus, the military promised him security, recognition, and a new lab free of Umbrella's corruption. Birkin wasn't just leaving, he was burning the bridges behind him. As the date of extraction drew closer, he quietly began dumping T-Virus strands into various Raccoon City facilities. Disposal sites like the P-12A facility and even a sewer treatment plant. Whether out of arrogance, paranoia, or sheer spite, Birkin wanted to make sure that Umbrella came for him, that it would be too late. Distracted by an outbreak of their own making, the virus spread slowly, unnoticed. Early September, strange illnesses began surfacing across the city. The Raccoon General Hospital was placed under tight quarantine as doctors baffled by a new contagion that resisted antibiotics and killed with fever, seizures, and psychosis. This was no accident, it was a soft release, an unspoken declaration of war. Birkin knew Umbrella would come for him, so he bought himself time. He bribed Raccoon Police Chief Bribe Irons, a corrupt and sadistic man, to manipulate patrol routes and clear out the sewer systems. Umbrella sent in their kill teams, Birkin would see them coming. And they did. Umbrella's Secret Service, USS, was deployed, ordered to retrieve the G-Virus at any cost. They moved in silence through the tunnels beneath the city, planting C4 charges and preparing the storm nest, but Birkin had been watching. Before the USS could reach the lower levels, a lone RPD officer, diverted on Iron's orders, stumbled into their path. The operation was compromised. Birkin knew his time was up. In a final act of self-preservation and vengeance, he released the lab's most lethal weapons, the Hunter R BOWs, reptilian killers bred for speed, strength, and brutality. The Hunters slaughtered everyone, security teams, the scientists, the lab assistants, and even Birkin's own personal guard detail. He made sure only 2 people were left alive in Nest, himself and his wife Annette. No one else knew the full potential of G-Virus, no one else could steal it. He had spent his life in that lab, and now he would die to protect it, or worse, live because of it. The Umbrella Security Service's Alpha Team, led by the cold, clinical operative only known as Hunk, dispatched with only one objective: retrieve the G-Virus. Birkin had become a liability, and the Umbrella had no intention of negotiating with him. They moved through Nest with surgical precision, silent as phantoms, and when they found Birkin in his lab cornered and defiant, there was no time for conversation. They opened fire. The bullets tore through his chest, rupturing organs, shattering ribs. He collapsed, bleeding out beneath the very equipment he built. The blue glow of the G-virus files flickering beside him. As the team retrieved the samples, none of them noticed that Birkin still clutched a single vial. His fingers curled tightly around it, refusing to let go. That was their mistake. Dying and desperate, Birkin did what no sane man would do. He injected himself with the G-virus. Within seconds, the transformation began. Muscles twisted, bones cracked. His scream became a guttural roar. The man who had created the G was now becoming G. A creature of spiraling mutation, driven by instinct, rage, and a relentless biological imperative to replicate. Birkin tore through Alpha Team with terrifying ease. Flesh was ripped, armor shredded, and bullets meant to subdue him bounced off his glowing, shifting frame. Bodies were tossed aside like dolls. A stolen case, holding Umbrella's most valuable asset, was smashed in the chaos, his contents spilled in the darkness. Only Hunk survived, dragging himself from the carnage with one objective: escape. But it was already too late. As Birkin rampaged through the tunnels and catwalks of the sewer system, the T-virus contaminated everything. Blood pulled into runoff systems, fragments of tissue drifted into the flow, and down in the shadows, creatures Umbrella had never meant to see the light of day began to stir. It started small, a war between scavengers. The rats feeding on the infected material were first to change. Some died, others mutated. Many simply fled, into pipes, into the subway, into the heart of the Victory Lake, Raccoon City's primary reservoir. There, the virus found its next host. The Raccoon Dam employees, exposed through cuts, bites, or contaminated air. From the dam, it spread into the drinking water. By the time the city officials noticed irregularities, it was already too late. The virus was in homes, in schools, in the bloodstream of thousands. Symptoms were slow at first: fever, aggression, confusion. But soon, people began collapsing in the streets, hospitals overfilled, families turned on each other. And all the while, Umbrella denied everything. They insisted the virus was contained, that the Arkley incident had been resolved, that there was no danger. But the sewers told a different story. The rats were still running, the infected were rising, and Birkin, the monster once known as William, was still down there, growing stronger with every mutation. September 16th, 1998. Umbrella surveillance systems flagged a growing number of hospital cases classified under a vague but chilling term: cannibal disease. Paramedics were reporting patients who bit their doctors, tore at the flesh of their families, and returned from the dead with glassy eyes and bloody jaws. The source was confirmed: water contamination. The city's reservoir was tainted. Tens of thousands were already exposed. Umbrella activated its contingency plan, not to save the city, but to control the narrative. The UBCS was deployed to the Raccoon City on September 26 with orders to assist in evacuations, contain the infection, and help federal forces. In truth, these soldiers, already marked for death, were test subjects, thrown into the live fire zone to provide combat data for the next generations of BOWs. Alongside them, Umbrella Europe and Umbrella USA deployed their latest creation to the chaos. The Nemesis T-Type, a towering, near unstoppable humanoid, was dropped into the city with one mission: locate and eliminate the remaining STARS operatives who had survived the Mansion incident, pose a threat to Umbrella's secrecy. Hunter Betas, deployed by Umbrella USA, was meant to be a more agile, precise killing machine released into urban combat scenarios to observe performance under stress. Hunter Upsilon, or Hunter Y, sent by Umbrella's Europe, was an amphibious predator specialized for sewer combat and ambush tactics. The city became a laboratory. Streets turned into battlegrounds, citizens were caught between the infected and monsters born in test tubes. But the virus didn't care about the data. In hours, the UBCS were annihilated. Entire squads vanished without contact. Survivors were either infected or hunted down. Panic spread. Federal forces, the Army and National Guard, established barricades, but soon realized they were not fighting against a surgency. They were fighting against a plague. Unable to gain control, they pulled back to defensive blockades, effectively abandoning Raccoon City. Inside, chaos ruled. The infected roamed freely, communication broke down, and fire spread out through the city as gas lines burst and vehicles burned. Pockets of survivors clung to life wherever they could. Police stations, hospitals, subways. They were just cut off and hunted. And far above it all, in Washington, D.C., another plan took shape. Derek C. Simmons, a high-ranking figure with ties to intelligence and military operations, used his influence to push for complete eradication. Support from figures like Don Davis, he lobbied the National Security Council, painting the outbreak as an uncontainable threat to national security. His solution was simple, brutal, final. On October 1st, the President of the United States, the Joint Chief of All Staffs, and the NSC made the call. Raccoon City would be destroyed. Experimental fuel air bomb, never before used domestically, was authorized for deployment. At dawn, the city vanished in flame. The bomb vaporized infected and uninfected alike. Buildings are flattened, the dead incinerated. And all that remained was Raccoon City was a crater and smoke. Officially, the outbreak was declared contained. The city's destruction a tragic but necessary sacrifice. But the truth had already bled into the world. Despite the obliteration of evidence, the G-Virus was not lost. It had been stolen, traded, and smuggled in the confusion. Umbrella has secured samples through their own Black Ops channels. The rival company, the same one Ada worked for, created materials through embedded agents. Elements within the US government quietly preserved samples for their own weapons programs. An American terrorist organization required material for plans for mass-scale bioterror. A black market dealer with no allegiances sold what he had found to the highest bidder. The G-Virus lived on. Umbrella has survived, but not untouched. Investigations loomed. Whistleblowers emerged, survivors told their stories. The company's mask had cracked. But in the shadows, others waited. Simmons, Wesker, Ada, and the new players rising from the ruins of Raccoon City all had plans. Because if Raccoon City had proven anything, it was that bioweapons could no longer be contained. They could only be used. Raccoon City was gone, but its shadow stretched far across the world. The fireball that swallowed the city on October 1st, 1998 was meant to be the end of the nightmare. A surgical, total erasure, but instead it became the match that lit the fuse on Umbrella's downfall. Despite efforts by Umbrella and its political allies to bury the truth, survivors had escaped the burning wreckage. People like Alicia Ashcroft, tenacious journalists who saw what others refused to print, began to tell the real story. Zombies, bioweapons, corporate betrayal. These were not urban legends, they were facts. And while most of the media dismissed their articles as paranoia or trauma-induced fabrications, the seed of doubt had just been planted. Behind closed doors, panic spread through Capitol Hill. Congress, already shaken by the president's controversial decision to authorize the bombing, convened in emergency sessions. The public was outraged. The government couldn't explain why an American city had been wiped off the map. Survivors whispered about monsters. Soldiers' families demanded answers. The White House could no longer point the finger at a virus while shielding the company that had created it. Under overwhelming pressure, Congress voted to revoke Umbrella USA's license to do business on American soil. The company's domestic assets were seized and federalized. Military contracts were suspended. Research centers were shut down or occupied. Umbrella's sprawling empire began to crumble, not with fire but with red tape and signatures. Soon after the president resigned, a decision that had once seemed decisive was now his undoing. With no public explanation to justify the obliteration of the entire city, he became the face of tragedy no one would accept. And yet, even as a legal machine turned against it, Umbrella was not dead. No, not yet. The company still operated in Europe and Asia, and across the black market. Rival corporations, opportunists, and rogue straits were more than willing to buy what Umbrella still had to offer, but they were no longer seen as pioneers. They were pariahs, hunted in secret, whispered of in policy meetings and war rooms. The global threat of bioweapons had finally been recognized, if not publicly, then by those in power. The U.S. Department of Defense, humiliated by the loss of the elite Delta Team units inside Raccoon City, and alarmed by how close the outbreak had become to breaching containment, formed a new initiative within STRATCOM, a strategic command division tasked with overseeing national security threats. It was called the Anti-Umbrella Pursuit and Investigations Team. This wasn't just another government task force, it was a Black Ops agency designed to specifically track, investigate, and neutralize any remaining bioorganic threats. The creation marked the beginning of a new protocol, Antivirus Weapon Protocol number 7600. The order authorized unsolicited operations in foreign countries. No permission, no diplomacy. If an outbreak was detected, they had full authority to deploy agents and eliminate the threat by any means necessary. The world had changed. The age of covert virology and secret corporate warfare was now passing. Now, it was out in the open, messy, violent, and impossible to ignore. Umbrella was being hunted by governments, rival corporations, and even its former agents, many of whom now work for emerging anti-biohazard organizations. Its assets were shrinking, its executives were disappearing, its research stolen and repurposed, and somewhere in the chaos, the last remnants of its twisted legacy. Wesker, Simmons, Ada, the family, and the others began to plot something new. Because while Umbrella was dying, Bioterror was just getting started. Bombing Raccoon City had drawn too many eyes that might start looking further backward, deeper toward the progenitor virus, the true origin of it all. For a decade, Umbrella's African facility had quietly harvested and studied the mutagen hidden within the stairway of the sun, guarded by silence buried beneath the earth. But with bioterror investigations ramping up and government watchdogs on every continent, the secret could no longer be preserved through shadows alone. So Spencer gave the order, shut it down. In November 1998, the African facility went dark. No explanations, no transfers, just silence. Within days, its entire staff, including Brandon Bailey, founding figure in the progenitor research, was eliminated, erased. One final loose end tied off in blood. With Bailey's death, the last link to the original progenitor project was severed. And Spencer slipped further into isolation, watching his creation rot from the inside. But Umbrella's enemies weren't finished. That same month, a new threat emerged, not from a rival megacorp or armed rebellion, but from a single agent. Leon S. Kennedy, now operating under Stratcom, sent an investigator named Ark Thompson to infiltrate Sheena Island, occupied Umbrella-owned territory with a reputation for secrecy and civilian obedience. What Thompson discovered was worse than even DHT suspected. Sheena Island wasn't just another lab, it was a mass production site for tyrants. Umbrella's most deadly BOW line. Its commander, Vincent Goldman, had turned the island into a prison of flesh and fear. When he caught wind of Thompson's investigation, he panicked. Believing that the agent would be an internal Umbrella auditor to protect himself, he initiated a lockdown and triggered an outbreak. Within hours, the island was engulfed in viral chaos. Tyrants ran loose, civilians were hunted, children died constant, and 2 young survivors escaped. Their evacuation followed by a catastrophic explosion that reduced the entire facility to rubble. Then came December. Umbrella's Rockford Island training camp, once a proud military base, a boot camp for the next generation of corporate soldiers, was suddenly attacked, not by government agents or protesters, but by a rival paramilitary group, HCF. They brought with them hunter BOWs, savage evolved monsters cloned from stolen Arkley lab data, parting gift from Albert Wesker, now a rogue agent playing by his own rules. The facility fell within hours, soldiers were torn apart, and its infrastructure destroyed. Umbrella's elite training program was gone. A few survivors, rattled, wounded, and affected, fled to their Arctic transport terminal, hoping to regroup, but they carried something with them. Not orders, not plans, the T-virus. The same virus that had burned a hole in Raccoon City was now loose beneath Antarctica's ice, and Umbrella didn't have time to respond because one man followed them there. Chris Redfield, former STARS operative, survivor of the mansion incident, and now a hunter of the very monsters Umbrella had created. Alongside his sister Claire, Chris infiltrated the Arctic base and discovered the horrifying extent of Umbrella's ambitions. T. Veronica virus, the remains of the Ashford bloodline, and the last of experiments that could have resurrected Umbrella's dying legacy. Instead, Chris triggered the facility's auto-destruct system, watching it vanish into fire and smoke. In the early 2000s, what remained of the company was no longer operating as a unified force. The collapse of Rockford Island and Sheena Island had destroyed Umbrella's ability to contain its own personnel. Those sites had served not as just research centers, but as prisons silencing dissenters, deserters, and anyone who knew too much. Now those doors were gone, and the people inside were free. Rogue scientists, ex-operatives, and black market brokers began leaking Umbrella's darkest secrets to the highest bidder. Some sold viral samples, others sold data, and a few, in their thirst for vengeance, sold everything. The world was suddenly at risk, not from a single corporation, but from dozens of fractured cells, each armed with pieces of Umbrella's bioorganic legacy. It was a nightmare no one could fully quantify, and yet the world remained willfully blind. Thanks to coordinated cover-ups and intelligence suppression by the US government, very few outside of the defense and intelligence communities knew how close the world had become to a catastrophic end again and again. It's unclear how many bioterror events occurred in those years, but the threat had grown real enough that the US government took action behind closed doors. The war on terror expanded America's global operations. A new agency, quietly born, the Federal Bioterrorism Commission, FBC, formed to investigate and neutralize unauthorized bioorganic activity. The FBC was tasked with responding to outbreaks and intercepting the global black market bioweapons. Umbrella's final betrayal didn't come from the outside. It came from one of their own. In 2002, Morpheus D. Duvall, a former Umbrella executive, resurfaced. Dismissed and humiliated after internal conflicts with the board, Morpheus became radicalized, and he struck back with a devastating act of bioterror. First, his team raided Umbrella Europe's Paris laboratory, reaching one of the last remaining vaults of T-virus and the experimental T plus G virus, a horrific hybrid meant to combine the mutagenic powers of G with the virulence of T. Then they hijacked the Spencer Rain, an Umbrella transport ship en route to North America, carrying elite hunter BOWs for an undisclosed client. Once they controlled the ship, Morpheus issued a global threat: pay $5 billion, or he would launch missile strikes loaded with viral payloads at the United States and China. It was a nightmare Umbrella had spent decades trying to avoid. The moment their own weapons were turned against the world, governments scrambled, intelligent networks are activated. In a rare moment of unity, STRATCOM and China's Ministry of State Security coordinated a joint operation to intercept and neutralize the threat. The result was swift and brutal. Morpheus Duvall was eliminated, Spencer Rain was sunk, and the missiles never launched. The world never knew how close it had come, being destroyed. The entire incident was classified and buried, labeled as a naval accident in the international press. Cover-up held, barely. Within the military and counter-bioterror circles, the message was clear. Umbrella had lost control. Its viruses, its monsters, and its legacy were now in the hands of the unpredictable, desperate, and the vengeful. The once mighty company was now just a collection of ghosts and ruins, devouring itself in a final spiral of corruption. By 2003, Umbrella was gasping for air, a hollow shell of a company clinging to legacy, secrets, and desperation. After its global operations had collapsed and its legal right to operate in the United States had been revoked, Umbrella retreated into the shadows, into a forgotten chemical plant hidden in the Caucasian mountains, purchased years earlier through a shell company. This isolated fortress became Umbrella's final stronghold. Commanded by Colonel Sergei Vladimir, the facility was more than a refuge. It was a war bunker, a last stand built around two remaining pillars of Umbrella's ambitions: the Talos project and a supercomputer known as the UMF-013. Talos, the Tyrant Armored Lethal Organic System, had been salvaged from the ruins of the Arklay laboratory at the Dimension incident. It represented Umbrella's final attempt to merge BOW power with machine intelligence. A towering monstrosity of steel, tissue, and rage, the UMF-013, meanwhile, was Umbrella's black heart. A massive data bank containing all the company's research blueprints, virus strains, and combat data. If Umbrella were to fall, Vladimir insisted someone would rise to claim its legacy. And so the company did what it had always done. It gambled with the world. To avoid bankruptcy, BOWs once considered failures were now mass-produced and sold to the highest bidder. War-torn regions, lawless frontiers, particularly those affected by global expansion of the world on terror, became sound testing grounds. Sales spiked, governments turned a blind eye. In some circles, bioorganic weapons became a whispered reality. In others, they remained phantoms. Conspiracy theories spoken of only in military back channels. One such operation, deep in South America, was brought to the halt by STRATCOM agent Leon S. Kennedy. The truth, as always, was suppressed. But Umbrella's secrecy had a half-life, and in January 2003, it finally ran out. Caucus facilities suffered a containment failure. BOWs escaped. Local villagers, hired as part-time security and couriers, attempted to flee, but instead sealed themselves in a storage complex with the infected. Within an hour, the village was overrun. The few who weren't devoured turned. The village was burned to the ground. Its ashes meant to hide the mistakes, but the flames did more than cleanse. They attracted attention. Names reappeared like ghosts from the past. Dr. Albert Wesker, now operating in secret for his own ends. Briss Redfield, former STARS member and Umbrella's most relentless pursuer. Wesker arrived first. He wasn't there to destroy Umbrella, but to pick its bones clean. The UMF-013 supercomputer held everything. Progenitor, T-Virus, G-Virus, T-Veronica, Nemesis, and the early drafts of something darker, Ouroboros. Wesker downloaded the data and vanished into the smoke, leaving only locked doors and empty halls behind. Redfield and Valentine arrived soon after. The suspicious confirmed. The Umbrella chemical plant was real. Together with the private anti-biohazard service, EABS. They stormed the facility, cutting through the last remnants of Umbrella's defenses and destroying mutated experiments running rampant through the lower levels. Then came the final confrontation, the monstrous Talos, piloted by a dying Colonel Sergei. A grotesque fusion of science and vengeance, Talos was a last stand, a monument to the time when Umbrella ruled unchallenged, but like everything the company had built, it was doomed to fall. When the monster died, so did Umbrella. Hawkeye's base was destroyed, data lost, except to Wesker. The world would never hear what happened there, but the world had already changed. After the bombing of Raccoon City and the dismantling of its U.S. operations, Umbrella Pharmaceuticals and its parent corporation were still clinging to life through one final gambit, the legal war in the United States. It started in late 1999. Umbrella launched an aggressive, expensive campaign to reverse the federalization of U.S. Umbrella, seeking to regain control of its frozen assets and, more crucially, absolve itself of responsibility for the Raccoon City disaster. The stakes were monumental. They found liable compensation claims from the victims and their families would bankrupt the company outright. For nearly 4 years, Umbrella fought tooth and nail in the U.S. federal courtrooms. It hired high-profile lawyers, it planted false witnesses, doctored reports, and used every connection it had left to shift blame away from itself. The strategy? Claimed that the U.S. government was responsible, and had used Umbrella's research without consent. They painted Raccoon City as a rogue military experiment, citing classified documents and deflecting every accusation. 2 former employees, Yoko Suzuki and Linda Baldwin, stood in court and testified under oath. They had survived the horrors firsthand. Their accounts are vivid, damning, and emotionally powerful. They spoke of unethical experiments, of cover-ups, of monsters bred in secret. They named names. Ella tried to discredit them, but something shifted when a new, unexpected player entered the field. Dr. Albert Wesker. Long presumed dead and officially disavowed by Umbrella, Wesker had his own agenda. He offered the court a sealed archive of internal Umbrella data, excerpts pulled from the UMF-013 supercomputer he had stolen from the Caucasus facility. Files included emails, personal logs, viral deployment schedules, and evidence of BOW combat tests in Raccoon City. The documents are real, undeniably real. There was only one condition. The evidence could not be released to the public. Doing so, Wesker warned, would implicate high-ranking officials in the United States government, men who had authorized, funded, or ignored the threat in the early stages to protect the American interest. The court agreed. The verdict was now inevitable. In a final devastating blow, the court found Umbrella directly responsible for the Raccoon City incident and associated bioweapons disasters. The company was ordered to pay damages it could never afford. By the spring of 2004, Umbrella Pharmaceuticals and the Umbrella Corporation formally declared bankruptcy. The heart of the company stopped beating. Its final remnants, scattered labs, ghost divisions, forgotten subsidiaries, vanished almost overnight. The once proud Japanese branch, long discontinued from the chaos overseas, liquidated in March 2004 after every major buyer pulled out, refusing to touch the poison brand. No corporation in Japan was willing to risk its reputation, not for all the patents in the world. And still one man remained unaccounted for. Oswald Spencer, the architect of it all, had vanished from the public eye. As the trial concluded, American and Russian intelligence services issued joint warrants for his arrest, citing crimes against humanity, illegal experimentation, and the unauthorized use of biological agents on civilized populations. But Spencer had long since disappeared into the fog, retreating into the last of his private estates, guarded by secrecy, shadow, and what remained of his resources. He was the last survivor of the founding trio, a man who had built a company in his own image and then watched it devour itself. He would not be seen again for years, and when he finally was, he was not the one in control.